This episode of the Fiction Writers Podcast is brought to you by How to Write a Novel That Sells. Do you dream of writing a best-selling fiction novel? With the right tools, you could get there sooner than you think. Visit www.howtowriteanovelthatsells.com and unlock the secrets to writing compelling fiction taught by international best-selling author Lana McAra. Welcome to the Fiction Writers Podcast with Lana McAra, where you will discover tips, tricks, and ideas for fiction that is #unputdownable. Here you'll find new energy, new perspectives, new resources, and new ideas that will spark your creativity into a blaze of brilliance. It's easier than you think. Be sure you visit our website at www.fictionwriterspodcast.com. While you're there, subscribe to us via your favorite network. Now, get out your notebook, tune in, and let's get started.
Hello, my name is Lana McAra, and welcome to the Fiction Writers Podcast. Tips, tricks, and ideas for fiction, that is. #unputdownable. Before we introduce our guest today, I wanted to just let you know that I have a brand new gift that I just wrote this past week, and I'm excited about letting you know about it. It is a sheet, a checklist for cutting your editing time in half by using Find and Replace on your word processor. There are certain times when you can use Find and Replace and certain times when you should not use Find and Replace. And so to go pick that up, just go to my website, lanamcara.com/gift. And it's a free PDF download. You are welcome to use it and enjoy it. Well, today I am just delighted to welcome to the podcast Beth Castrodale. Beth is a fiction writer and the founding editor of the book review website, Small Press Picks. Her debut novel, Marion Hatley, was a finalist for a Nielsen Prize for her first novel in Southeast Missouri State University Press. And an excerpt from her second novel, In This Ground, was a shortlist finalist for a William Faulkner, William Wisdom Creative Writing Award. In a review of Castrodale's third novel, I Mean You No Harm, critic Beth Ann Patrick observed, Castrodale is the real thing, a novelist who fuses mordant humor, I love that, mordant humor, and great genre tropes with warmth and courage. An excerpt from her fourth novel, The Inhabitants, landed Castrodale an artist grant from the Mass Cultural Council. The novel will be released by Regal House Publishing, congratulations, in September 2024. Welcome, Beth.
Oh, it's so great to be here. Thank you so much for hosting me.
Oh, I'm excited. Spooky novels are so fun, not only to write, but to read and to talk about, aren't they?
Oh, indeed. Yes, indeed.
So how did you get started writing this type of book?
You know, it's funny. Ever since I was a little girl, I love spooky stories, and I used to actually write my own stories and make these staple-bound novels that I illustrated. And I was always fascinated by the genre. And but for whatever reason, like I started writing fiction, and I always wanted to write a ghost story, but I was kind of afraid. I think because I thought that's a funny term to use, right? Afraid, but I was always afraid to that I wouldn't do a good enough job. You know what I mean? So I just spent a lot of time just, reading in the genre and writing. And I thought, I'm finally going to write one. And so I finally set about, a few years ago to just start working on one. So
good for you. And I love what you said there. You started reading the genre. I'm in my classes, I find so many students that don't read the genre that they want to write in. And when you read the genre, you get a feel for it. And it's even more than just the story. It's the length of the chapters, the length of the books, how many characters. There's so much to it that you get from actually reading it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You learn so much, right?
Yes. Who would you say are some of your favorite authors?
There's so many of them, and some we might touch on our discussion today, but I think, like, for instance, Shirley Jackson is phenomenal. There's also Henry James. I think The Turn of the Screw might be one of my favorite chilly books. There's also Anne River Siddons. She's wonderful. Stephen King, I've loved reading him. And there's just so many authors I can think of, but there's many people to learn from out there for sure.
Yes, yes. That is so good to follow up on who's out there now, who's contemporary, and finding people in the same type of book. In Amazon, if you go to the book page below it, it says other books like this, and looking at who's got the most reviews. Those are the ones I go after. I go after books with a lot of reviews because I figure must be people reading.
Right. That's a good idea.
Yeah, yeah. So what are some elements that you've discovered of spooky novels?
I think it's just, there's many I can mention, but I think there's like four main things that I mentioned. And the one thing that I think is an important element is that the setting is a character. And sometimes it's the most unsettling character in the whole story. And it's kind of the center of gravity. And if you'll indulge me for a minute, I just thought I'd read that, their famous opening lines from Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House. And there's a couple of things that I think she just does brilliantly. And she says, no live organism can continue for long to exist sanely under conditions of absolute reality. Even larks and katydids are supposed by some to dream. Hill House, not sane, stood by itself against its hills, holding darkness within. It had stood so for 80 years and might stand for 80 more. Within, walls continued upright, bricks met neatly, floors were firm, and doors were sensibly shut. Silence lay steadily against the wood and stone of Hill House, and whatever walked there walked alone. And what I love about that, there's a few different things. Like, I love how she makes like a conscious living entity of the house. Like, she refers to it as being not sane, and that it holds the darkness within. And then we have that great final line of like, whatever walked there walked alone. We get this almost like sort of embodied physical presence of this house. And I think that's so brilliant. And another place as character that I'd recommend or think it would be fun to talk about is I mentioned Anne Rivers Siddons in her book, The House Next Door. That is a huge character of the book. And basically it's a new house that's just been built, but for whatever reason, it has this malevolence in it. And then anyone who moves into the house, just horrible tragedies befall them. And then it starts turning neighbor against neighbor. And it just kind of infects the whole neighborhood. So it's just, I love stories like that where it's so creepy because something is going on, you don't know what it is, and then that setting holds it. And then the next element I'd mention is that when the uncanny breaks into ordinary life. So, you have a usual setting, everything seems normal, and then things are just going a little uphill, or something weird is happening in a normal space. And the book that I have coming out, The Inhabitants, one of the things, it's an older kind of creepy house, and there's a housekeeper who, she has a history with the house, but an old history, and she seems to reappear out of nowhere. And she does housekeeperly things and seems very normal, but then things start to get strange with her, and you get the sense that she's not quite who she seems. So it's a little bit of that becoming involved in the story. And then the next element I'd mention is that there's disorientation, or characters feel unsure of themselves and what they're seeing or believing. And like, I think a famous example of that is in Henry James's The Turn of the Screw, where we have a governess who comes on the scene, and the house has a history, the previous governess, she starts to believe that maybe she's seen the ghost of that governess and the ghost of a valet, and she's worried that they're going to corrupt the young students that she's helping. But as the reader, we don't really know, is she hallucinating? Is she seeing ghosts? And there's that sort of tension of like, what's real and what's not. And it's never really resolved. And I love that when you kind of, even as a reader, you're kind of like, what's going on? Can I trust it? And that really brings a lot of tension. And the last element I mentioned is just empathy, and the importance that the writer has empathy for the characters. And there's a writer, Gabino Iglesias, who says, he has a quote that he says, without empathy, horror fails. Like, if you can't feel a connection with the characters in some way, that you're just not going to feel bought into the story. And one really famous example of that, I think, is Stephen King's Carrie, where the protagonist Carrie has been bullied by her classmates, and her mother's bullying her. And when you get to you really feel for her, what she's going through when you get to the climax of the novel and the vengeance. there, and that you really kind of see where it's coming from. And I feel like you wouldn't really have as much, you wouldn't feel as bought into that climax as if you weren't feeling empathy for Carrie. So those are, I can go on, but those are kind of the four main things that I see as coming into play.
Yes. Connecting to the main character. Otherwise, it's not as scary, is it?
No, absolutely. And you're kind of like, why am I invested into the story? Like, why do I care about these people?
Yes, exactly. You have to build the tension. And that was another word that I saw that you said. This type of book is all about tension.
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
So when you're, I'm just adding a little here, when you're building tension, is that in just the weirdness, or is that between characters? How do you handle tension?
That's a great question. I think it has a lot of different variables. I think you're right, between characters, between the reality versus perception, that tension. And I say that I think it has something to do with just to kind of get a little ahead. Like, one of the challenges I find writing in the genre is pacing, and pacing is all about tension, because I feel like if you, I think in a lot of the supernatural spooky tales, there's an ongoing mystery, or maybe a number of mysteries are unfolding, and you want to kind of, as a writer, think through about how you want to unspool that, because if you let go of too much too early, you kind of give up that tension. And then I think sometimes then the novel toward the midsection can sag or go adrift, because you just, you kind of lose that momentum, So I think the tension of kind of keeping the reader on edge, right? So every chapter, every time they finish a chapter, they're like, okay, what's next? They want to keep going, and they're pulled ahead by that tension.
Yes. And the tension is, I write mysteries, and tension is a huge part of the mystery genre, to keep the person curious, to keep them looking, to keep them there, I mean, why not just run away, get on a bus, and never come back,
Yeah, exactly. It's true. And it's hard. That's hard, isn't it? I mean, when you're reading a book and it's handled well, and it's like, what's the cliche where when someone does something well, that's really difficult to make it look easy, but like, it's hard, right? It's hard to pace things well and have that ongoing tension, I think.
Yes, exactly. I read a book recently that was about a vampire, and there was a whole host of these characters that were supernatural characters, and they shapeshifted. At night they turned into some kind of an animal, spirit animal. So, but it was humorous. I wasn't scared at all.
Right. Okay. That's even down. Did you enjoy the humor, or was like, okay, this doesn't really belong in this book? Or did you feel like...
I actually, the author pulled it off. I wish I could remember, but this is just spur of the moment, so I don't have that prepared.
Right.
But the vampire actually did bite someone. It was toward the end. Did bite someone. That person was passed out, because that's what happens when they do that. And he had the man's leg, and he was pulling him by his foot, by his shoe, across the yard. And so this unconscious man is just like being dragged across the yard by this, vampire with a foot under his arm, pulling him off into the bushes. And it was funny. Why is that funny?
It's funny. It's almost like slapstick, almost, or physical comedy kind of thing.
Yes. And someone looked out and didn't even think anything of it. Oh, there he is.
That sounds like it could be my kind of book, actually. I like some humor woven in there.
Yes. And the girl was a little frightened, and the house was a character. The house would close doors and you couldn't unlock them and things like that. So yes, that was really not my normal genre, but I enjoyed the book very much because it was funny. So what do you find the most challenging about writing this kind of book?
I would go back to the point that I've made about pacing. Is just unfolding things and kind of timing things in the right way, so the mystery doesn't get revealed too early, and it comes out in an authentic and organic way, but that, you know, is kind of keeping readers moving. And one of the ways that I've addressed that challenge or tried to is do just a little bit of outlining to kind of see how information is dropping and how the story's unfolding. And I know there's a lot of controversy about outlining. It's like some writers say, absolutely, I don't outline. Like if you outline, you totally destroy the mystery of discovery as you're writing. And I personally feel like there's a balance to be struck. Like I like the idea of having just kind of pulse points where I know where this kind of get a sense of the beat and the arc of the story. And then when I'm writing individual scenes or chapters, I always surprise myself. You know, things always kind of, you know, surprises come out and I'm like, oh yeah, I need to do that. And, you know, like I still feel like I feel like you can have your cake and eat it too in that regard. Like I feel like I don't want to outline every single, you know, beat of the story, but I feel like having like sort of a general arc helps. And then that helps you kind of pace out. Okay, when do I want to reveal that bit, or when should this little surprise come out? And, you know, like that, for me personally, I find that approach very helpful.
Yes, I do something very similar. I will plan my chapters to the middle of the book, but I don't plan the end from the middle on, because I know the characters are going to develop and things are going to happen. And there's no way to know until you actually get to the writing point. So how do you ascertain, how do you find out whether your pacing is working or not working?
You know, it's hard. I mean, sometimes I don't know it. And sometimes I feel like when I'm in the middle, I don't know if you ever get this feeling, but sometimes when I'm in the middle of a draft, I'm like, you know, I don't have a great feeling about, like, I feel like there's this part is running out of steam. Like sometimes I'll just like, I try not to over edit when I'm writing, but I use Google Docs. On the comment box, I might write something like, feel saggy, or move this chapter up, move it later, cut it. Sometimes I'll just cut. I realize that the answer is to just cut something. So sometimes it's not until I'm actually drafting. Sometimes when I get comments from beta readers, I realize, okay, like I need to like add a little bit more tension or information here, or I'm giving away too much. So it kind of happens in different ways. And sometimes that's why I'm really glad to have beta readers, because sometimes I have a blind spot, even when I think I really thought through something really carefully. They'll be like, well, it was kind of like, my mind was kind of like, I always tell people, like, if you ever feel like you're getting bored, or, you know, you're drifting in the story, I need to know, you know, so that helps a lot.
Yes. Beta readers are lifesavers because they're looking at it with fresh eyes. I find that looking at all the details really makes it hard for me to see the big picture.
Definitely. Absolutely. We can't do it all. And we know what, I would hazard to say, even the most brilliant writer in the world, I think you can't see everything in your story, you know?
Yes, absolutely. I'm an editor and I hire someone else to edit.
Yeah, no, I do too. I mean, I think it's so true. Like, I think we're just all, and it's so great that they can, sometimes they're like, oh gosh, I'm so glad you noticed that. Like, because once someone points it out, sometimes you're like, oh gosh, how did I not see that? But you're so grateful that their fresh eyes that you see it, you know?
Yes. I believe writing is a collaborative effort. We have the people that we depend on to help us. It's not all just you. It's got to be other input as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So where do you get your ideas?
They come from all over the place. But I will say, so just focusing on my new novel, The Inhabitants, like I always loved, this is just one aspect of the story, but it sort of was one of the ideas that got the snowball rolling. I always love the housekeeper figure in creepy novels. Like I think of Mrs. Gross from The Turn of the Screw, or, you know, you think of like Mrs. Danvers from Rebecca, you know, they're sort of like, you know, they're kind of lurking in the dark, and they have a history with the place. But they seem to know a lot more than anyone else in the story. And sometimes they have this quiet power over things. So I knew that I wanted to have like a housekeeper figure like that. So that kind of like started, that was like one of the things that got the ball rolling. And of course you have to have a house, right? And then I got the idea of the architecture of this house. And I had the thought about like, how does the physical elements of our surroundings, how do they affect us emotionally and mentally and so forth? And I had this idea about the protagonist inheriting this house that was built by an architect who thought he could influence the mind through his construction. So she moves into one of his houses. And one of the things that's happening in the story is like she starts to have weird things happening to her, and she feels a little bit off kilter. And part of her is wondering, is this house, should I be here? I mean, is this place malevolent in a way that I just can't live here? But there turns out there's other things going on too. So that's just kind of one element. But so those are some of the seeds that were planted when I started.
Yes. The movie The Others.
Oh my gosh, I love that movie.
Where you get the idea that the ghost doesn't know they're a ghost, and that flipping it, turning it upside down. So fascinating to look at things from various perspectives and coming up with some offbeat approach that nobody would maybe think of. Yeah.
I love that movie. And I thought it was just so, like, it worked on so many other levels too. Like there's just heartbreak and grief, and just the mother child. I mean, I think it worked on so many other levels. I mean, talk about empathy. I was all in with those characters,
Yes, absolutely. What advice would you give to new writers starting out?
Yeah, so I would just say we kind of touched on this a little bit, but totally like speaking of spooky novels or spooky stories in particular, read widely in the genre. Like just read as much as you can. And I would add like movies and television to that, because I feel like sometimes we get ideas on I think about pacing in particular. Like if you look at a really good, solid series, like you think about, for spooky stuff, Mike Flanagan's his series that are on Netflix, like they're just so brilliantly paced from, if you think about each episode as a chapter, like what information is he allowing us in on in the first, and how do these different characters move? So, and yeah, reading, watching, and then the other thing that I would say is just to try to, kind of something we touched on too, is definitely find people whose opinion you trust and value, who can give you constructive criticism. And I think I don't know, I think it's everyone's personal choice about when they get that. And my own choice is like, for novels, I want to have a complete first draft before anyone sees a word, because the first novel I wrote, I got chapter by chapter feedback, and I found like I would go down rabbit holes of revision, and I wouldn't move forward with the drafting. So for me personally, I find it better to just wait until I have a complete first draft and then get feedback on it from there. And so I think that everyone has to make their own decision. And the last thing I would say, like for the spooky novels in particular, is like try to entertain yourself and have fun. I mean, I know writing can be challenging, and it can be a slog, but I feel like, I think we all know those moments where you feel like, gosh, this is just so, I'm really getting into these characters. I feel like I'm almost leaving my sense of self and having this great experience. And I feel like, those kind of experiences, when we feel engaged, I think we have a better chance of engaging our readers as well. So just try to let loose and try to enjoy the process as much as you can.
Yes, those moments of flow when you're just sort of like almost channeling the material out into the keyboard, and you have that sense of cohesiveness, it's working, and you're in that moment. That is such a good sign that you're on to something here. And to follow up on one of your points there about reading other people's books and studying them, I actually, in the beginning, because I wrote 14 years before I had a word published. If you had told me in those days that I would end up with 44 published books, I would have said, you're absolutely crazy. I can't even get one book done, because I was submitting to traditional publishers. In those days, there was no Amazon. You had to go traditional or nothing. So that would be to take a book that I really thought was top quality, and I would actually put sticky notes where the clues were, where different shifts in the story were, and then make notes, chapters, 1 through 20, and then what happened in chapter 1, what happened in chapter 2, so I could see the pacing, so I could get an idea of how did the author construct this, how did this all fit together. And that meant, reading it probably 5 or 6 times to analyze it, but I tell you, that was a tremendous exercise to really get a feel for it, because we read a book as a reader. We don't look at it as a writer, and that's huge. So what would you consider to be a sample book that someone could do that with and have, learn a lot?
Yeah, there's different ones I could come up with, but I would say, I think one book that I'm reading right now is And All Things Cease to Appear by Elizabeth Brundage. And I'm wrapping it up, and I just love it. It's so creepy, but I love the way that the novel is structured so beautifully, in that she has, and again, it's a house that, there was actually a murder committed in this house, and a new family moves into the home where the husband knows about the history, and he gets the house at auction really cheaply because of that, but he never tells the wife, and the wife gets to learn that, like, oh my gosh, someone was murdered here. She feels like a connection with something, like the woman who lived in the house before. But the thing that is really, I think, interesting about this book is that you have that story and the mystery and the supernatural stuff, but then you have the way that she fleshes out the lives of these two characters, and we get to see how and why the husband is who he is, and how the house came about in its story, but also the wife and her story. So I just think the structure is so brilliant. Like it has a linear structure, but built around that linear structure, all these great backstories and how they're woven in. So I think that might be like, if you're maybe not a beginner novel for paranormal, that might be a little bit, like a more of a, let's say like junior year kind of thing. But I think like a freshman one might be The House Next Door by Anne Rivers Siddons. And that's the book that I mentioned about the new house next door just has this malevolence in it. And that has a really good, you can really study the structure of that in terms of there's like the neighbor couple are like the main anchors in terms of figuring out what's going on next door. Why are people coming and going? And there's a great parallelism of their story and then the stories that are unfolding next door. So that might be a more a structure that would be more that, someone who's newer to writing it could kind of get their mind around and think about, from a more basic level. So
Those are great. Could you give me the title of the first one that you just mentioned again?
Yes, it's All Things Cease to Appear, and it's Elizabeth Brundage is the author, and oh my gosh, it's so good. I highly recommend it.
Yeah, I think I'm going to put that on my Audible list.
I think it would be a great Audible book. I think definitely audio book.
Cease to Appear.
All Things Cease to Appear. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Those are terrific helps, Beth. Thank you so much. This adds so much to our podcast today. I appreciate that.
Well, thank you. It's really been fun. I've been learning from you too, but it's great.
Yeah, it's good conversation. So how do we get more from you?
Yeah, so if probably the best thing is if anyone is interested in my writing or books or anything, I also have a blog. It's on BethCastrodale.com is my website. So that has anything you'd want to know about me, writing wise is on there. So that would probably be the best place to check out.
Okay. Are you on Instagram?
I am. Yes. It's Beth Castrodale is my handle.
Okay.
And also on Facebook, Beth Castrodale is my handle. And also Twitter /X is the same handle. So.
Okay. I am on Instagram, and my handle on Instagram is Lana McAra with the number 2. I had to put the number 2 because my first account got shut down for some crazy reason. So that's why it's actually a number, not a word. Are you on TikTok?
I think I have an account that I haven't really checked out. I mean, I feel kind of bad about that in that, like, you hear all about book talk and it's so important, but it's almost like, I almost feel like there's like my sensory system, can only take in so much, like I feel like maybe I'll leap on there sometime, but not as yet. But are you on TikTok or?
I haven't, a same thing. I have an account. I've done nothing with it. I just contacted the podcast company to see if I can get some short clips to put on TikTok from, these excerpts from these different shows, but I'm not there yet. And my VA does not know TikTok.
Okay.
So I can't just say, here, take it and do TikTok for me. She doesn't know how to. So yes, it's something in the future, but from what I hear, TikTok is the place to be. They actually have a store, TikTok store, where you put your books in and sell them right there. But, that is something that the young people are doing, and I'm not up to it at this point.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. And it seems like, I mean, one little anxiety I have is like I try to, I mean, I feel like I'm very screen attached, but I feel like I try to like preciously guard my like in my own head time, and I feel like, oh, am I going to jump off into another realm where I have less of that time, So
Yes, exactly. How much bandwidth do we actually have?
bandwidth, that's exactly the word. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right. Well, what about marketing? Do you have any specific things that you do to get yourself out there for your books?
There's a bunch of different things. And, I think with marketing, you're never sure like what exactly works or just what, but, there is the social media presence. Definitely podcasts are incredibly helpful. I try to do, there's different things I've tried, like with the Inhabitants. I kind of sent the book advanced reader copies to members of the American Booksellers Association, so they could consider whether they want to stock the book in their bookstores. There's also different. I've tried to write articles that are kind of like on a topic. You have to be really careful about, like, if you write an article, you don't want to super promote your book. You want to try to offer some useful tips or help, and then maybe your book is mentioned. So I try to write articles to place that could be get at some topics of interest to readers, but that my book is kind of mentioned. And those are just a few things, but gosh, it's so hard to know. I mean, I don't know if you can speak to this at all, but I feel like sometimes you wonder if it's not so much about a given book, but about your whole like existence as a writer. Like over time, if you across different books and across time, like if you kind of do different ways to kind of contribute to the conversation in different ways, that kind of at least maybe gets you on in people's radar in some way, and eventually maybe they'll look at your books or that's my hope anyhow. But
Yes, it is a process, and it's a long term, it's a long game to get your name out there consistently over time where people begin to recognize you. Speaking helps. If you can get opportunities to speak about novel writing and share your processes in different arenas, that helps. But those are writers, they're not readers. So you have to take a different tactic to get in front of more readers. And one of the things I recommend is to put something from my life into a novel, not specifically, not biographical, but something that might have happened or some interest that I have. I'll put it into a novel. And then I can go to whoever's interested in that thing and say, oh, yeah, I put that in my novel. And bring that topic over, so it's a real topic for me, but it's at least a talking point. Because in my first books, I was writing about the Old West. I didn't really have any point of contact for them. And then I stumbled into something where I did, and I realized, wow, this is easier. Because just for pulling something out of the air, I'm not interested in football. But say you were interested in football and you put a character in there who was a football player or a high school football player or something like that. And then you could say, oh, yeah, I put that character in because my son was in football and I thought it was an interesting thing to have in there. And then you have a point of contact. And the interview isn't even about the book. It's about this topic, football. And then at the end of the interview, they say, well, what about more? What are you doing? And say, oh, I have this book. And it has a story about football that's something like what happened to my son. Not exact, but something like that. Just to be able to mention it. And getting yourself out there that way has been more beneficial to me than anything else I've done, including book tables and all the other things, book signings. We need to do those things because we need to meet people and become a person to that person, not just a face or a name on a cover, but a person. And so I think the second thing is making those personal connections and being friendly and talking to people. And I just had an idea recently, which I'll share with you and share with the listeners too, because it just came to my mind. When I'm at a book table, I always have a piece of paper, on a clipboard to sign up for my newsletter. And I just realized that if you have a Zoom call where you say, sign up for this list, and then you can join my Meet the Author Zoom call and give them a reason to sign up for the newsletter. And then you can go into the room and talk to them and become a person, to them.
Right.
Human being. Instead of just saying, sign my newsletter. So, sign up for my newsletter so I can spam you with all kinds of email.
Right. That's a great idea. It makes a more personal connection too, right? That
personal connections. Lee Lincoln was someone that I interviewed back in the beginning when I started doing interviews. At first, I was just doing solos. But Lee Lincoln has a beautiful plan for meeting people and creating a following. And it's about being friendly with people in a coffee shop, on a bench at the park, or at your table or wherever you might be, so that you are no longer just a name on the cover. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And I think sometimes I think a lot of writers were introverts, but I feel like when I'm with other people who love books, you kind of like, we kind of are, it's like a natural sort of entree to conversation, right? And we have a lot of the same interests, and I think it's easier. You feel like they're your people kind of,
Yes, right, exactly. And they want to know when you have a new book coming out. They're excited about it. Yeah.
Right.
Beth, thank you so much for today. This has been an amazing conversation. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I can't think of anything. Yeah. I can't think of anything at all, but I've really enjoyed our chat and your ideas and thoughts too. So
thank you so much.
Yeah.
And thank you for being with us today. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for tuning into the Fiction Writers Podcast with Lana McAra, where we share tips, tricks, and ideas for fiction that is #unputdownable. Remember to visit our website at www.fictionwriterspodcast.com and enjoy even more great episodes like this one. Again, while you're here, subscribe to us via your favorite network. We look forward to seeing you next time on the Fiction Writers Podcast.